Today we will discuss about Amartya Sen's capability approach to justice in the Indian context. What we have seen all over the world, including in India, three important perceptions about justice started developing. The first approach towards the justice is basic rights approach. Basic rights approach for a long time dominated the field of human rights and the justice. That is where civil political rights have been given a prominence over the social economic rights. Then we could see in the 1980s increasing importance is given, 1980s and 90s both in India and abroad, importance to social economic rights, and then a new philosophy and articulation of rights of basic human needs started emerging. And the third approach in 90s, primarily in extension to Rawls' theory of justice, here we will look at Amartya Sen's capability approach to justice, where Amartya Sen focused or further extended the basic human needs to the capability of the poor and marginalized. So, in that context, let us look at two important laws passed by the Government of India. One is the National Food Security Act in 2013 and National Rural Employment Guarantee Act in 2005. First, let us look at National Food Security Act. Here, before we examine what is this law, why Amartya Sen focuses on national food security is forward looking and also which is accomplishing the capabilities approach in India towards a majority of the poor, those who are the below poverty line. So, let us look at the history behind this National Food Security Act. The history of this started in 1989. Kishan Patnaik from Orissa approached the Indian Supreme Court, 1989 Supreme Court, where he said and he highlighted the starvation deaths in Kalhandi and Koraput, and he said Article 21 is basic right to life. So, the state has a positive duty and obligation to provide right to food. And then later on, the first time basic human needs approach as a part of the Article 21 right to life was argued before the Supreme Court. Then 2001 People's Union of Civil Liberties came before the Supreme Court and said, let us look at right to food is important. In fact, if you look at basic human needs, the first basic need is food. So, if people are starving, if the public distribution system is not able to provide basic food grains to the people, the Supreme Court has examined. On the one hand, the food grains are rotten in the godowns of the Food Corporation of India, and people below the poverty line are not able to get basic food grains, rice, wheat and other. Then the issue came before the Supreme Court. Supreme Court for the first time has taken very innovative steps in the PUCL. This is popularly called as a food petitions court or right to food case, and then they have appointed commissioners. For the first time, the Supreme Court has appointed two very well known eminent bureaucrats of India, S.R. Shankaran and N.C. Saxena, former bureaucrats, as a food commissioner to help the Supreme Court in implementation of this right to food campaign and the petitions. That is how right to food. Before we examine the National Food Security Act, the legislative enactment came in 2013, but we see the whole long history of articulating right to food as a basic human need, and this human need is important particularly for the poor and marginalized, those who are below the poverty line. And let us look at now what is this 2013 Act, which came after the culmination of almost a decade long right to food movement before the Indian Supreme Court. 2013 National Food Security Act provides 5 kilos of food grain to the 75% of the rural people, those who are below poverty line, and 50% of the urban poor. In addition to that, it also extends the maternity benefit and other benefits to the women and children. So, here Amartya Sen has appreciated this move of the government of India, and he said this is a step forward advocating justice to the people in India. He gives a very interesting example to explain his capability approach towards the justice through the National Food Security Act. He says, let us look at a person who is fasting and a person who is starved. Now, look at the person who is fasting has a choice whether to eat or not to eat. But when comes to the person who is starving, he has no choice. He has no access to food, he has no food, he is about to die. So, the Amartya Sen's capability approach towards justice attempts to explain that access to food is necessary, opportunities should be provided to the people, and entitlement should be provided. So, we should prepare and provide capability of the capacities of the individual citizens, and that is what he calls as a capability approach towards justice. There are proponents and opponents, or we call supporters, and people started opposing this. The famous eminent economist Jagdish Bhagwati said this is a waste of money, this is a waste of huge amount of the financial resources of the government of India, and it will have a lot of burden. And in addition to that, he suggested, why do not we follow the direct cash transfer, because we have seen in several of these earlier also public distribution system is not properly working, there are layers of corruption, there are middlemen involved in this. Justice Bhagwati said, instead of this National Food Security Act direct cash transfer would reach to the beneficiaries directly. But Amartya Sen also said, this is a good move, but whether it will reach the beneficiaries by what happens through the direct cash benefit transfer, it may go only to the male members of the family, it may not reach to the beneficiaries, women and other. And the second important aspect Amartya Sen says in the National Food Security Act, particularly the direct cash benefit transfer, he says they may not spend which is meant for the food. They may spend on education, they may spend, or sometimes in the rural areas they may spend on the liquor. So, therefore, he says this is better, we should think about some innovative policies and approaches so that this food really reaches to the beneficiaries. The state of Orissa has a very promising scheme of the implementation of National Food Security Act from the year 2015, and that is what one of the important scheme which was propagated by the Orissa state government. So, now let us look at National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. This is also a long pending articulation of new right or a basic needs. How do we provide farmers in the rural areas or the rural poor during the what do you call as a non-peak season of the agriculture? So, they are almost all, they are not doing any work in the rural poor in the villages, and so this innovative new scheme in 2005 has come out with a employment guarantee program of 100 days of employment during this what is called as a lean season, and that will also is linked to the rural construction, whether it is a roads or other, so that indirectly the right to work right to have some form of employment, rural employment has been advocated by the government of India. Later they have renamed that as a Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. And here Amartya Sen says this is a empowerment of the poor, this is also a safety net. So, if we look at in the context of these two legislations advocate the capability approach towards justice, one form by providing food, right to food for the people those who are starving and those who are below the poverty line, and also on the other hand it will also provide for a basic right to work, which was a part of the directive principles of state policy of the government of India. So, we have discussed about the application of Amartya Sen's capability approach towards justice by using these two important legislations of the government of India. Thank you.